Chapter 950. What does this mean? Jiang Hai looked at the eyes of these people in front of him. If it weren't for the fact that these people still looked like humans, he would have thought that he was in a Resident Evil world. Why do these people's eyes look so strange? Oh, I'm not sure. I'll go and ask right away. Louis Quezada also felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange, so after thinking for a while he said something to Jiang Hai. He then nodded to Jittered Maud behind him. After Jittered Maud saw Louis Quezada nodding, she immediately took out a smartphone. However, her phone was different from ordinary smartphones. The system of this phone was the internal system of the CIA. No one could hack it, not even Wallace Shelley. And it seemed that the technology behind it was also very strong. Basically, a mobile phone is a transparent piece of glass. It's very thin, and if it's not turned on, others can't see it. Of course they can see it themselves. Jiang Hai has always been very interested in this kind of black technology, but for this kind of black technology, he feels that it's ordinary because he doesn't lack such black technology. Don't forget, he was a shareholder of Google, although the smart system in his house was not yet complete. But before he left, the two guys at Google also gave Jiang Hai a new bracelet that was connected to his glasses. When he wanted to make a call, he did not need to take out his phone anymore. He could directly look at it with his eyes. The bracelet would project the phone's screen, and he could directly operate it on it. It could be projected into the air, on his arm, or on the table, etc. The technology seemed to be very powerful, so he was not envious of the transparent phone. After all, we don't have much hot water here. In the kitchen over there, dinner time is at 5:30 p.m. If you have any requests, remember to tell the chef in advance. The chef will try his best to satisfy your requests, but the amount is up to them. There's a public bath here and there's a bar over there. As long as someone is there, you can buy beer. Beer is free, but foreign wine costs money. You can't enter the research room, but the observation deck doesn't matter. Any other questions? At this time, Vestin Carl led Jiang Hai and the others to a row of rooms and said to Jiang Hai. After hearing that there were no more questions, Jiang Hai and the others also got the keys to their respective rooms. After opening the door, they also walked into their rooms. But when he saw that Azalina, Wallace Shelley, and Galina Vizcaya had all moved into Jiang Hai's room, he couldn't help but twitch his mouth, then sighed helplessly, turned around and left. It was obvious that he was not in a good mood now. What do you mean? Looking at the man who seemed to be unhappy walking away, Jiang Hai frowned and asked with some puzzlement. Ahem, we seem to have broken the rules here. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Gitard Maud's face inexplicably blushed. Then he showed the information in his hand to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned, then his expression became a little strange. Because the information written on it seemed a bit ridiculous. To be honest, Jiang Hai himself found it quite difficult to accept what was written on the information. Because the geographical conditions in Antarctica were somewhat special, this place could only be entered for 3 months in a year, and there were still 9 months where it could not be entered. Therefore, supply ships and the like would transport enough materials for these people to live for 9 months during these 3 months. Then these people from the scientific research station would be left here for 9 months. During this time they couldn't contact their families, so naturally there was no entertainment to speak of. Because the sunlight in Antarctica was very short during winter, electricity was also available. Everyone lived together all day without electricity, there was nothing to play with, and there was almost no way to go out. Under such circumstances, the Americans, or rather the Westerners, were originally very indulgent. Just like in the ancient Wuxia, everyone went to bed early and there was no nightlife. Under such circumstances, there was nothing else to do except for not being able to write about it. Therefore, there was also an unwritten rule in the Antarctic Scientific Research Station, which was to make this place an independent existence from the rest of the world. Here, the way to vent was to find a partner, which was what the people here called an ice wife or an ice husband. Many of these people were married people, so they didn't care about this. Each person would use at least 120 condoms every year, not to mention when they didn't bring any. Therefore, the Antarctic Scientific Research Station would give these people an experience every year, the most important of which was to check for diseases such as AIDS. Although these scientific research stations tried to recruit people according to a 1-to-1 ratio, not many women were willing to come, so basically the recruitment ratio was about 2-to-1. In this way, in the scientific research station, women were well-deserved queens. They had the right to choose their own partners, and the men were somewhat depressed. This time, when they saw that there were 4 beautiful women in Jiang Hai's group, the men were very excited. However, when they saw Azalina and the others living in Jiang Hai's room, they knew that they had no chance, so Dr. Carl sighed helplessly. It seems that this place is really messy. After reading the information, Jiang Hai then gave the phone to Jittered Maud and curled his lips. He knew that these guys were up to no good just now. Don't go out easily tonight. Don't cause any trouble. Tomorrow morning we will leave after getting the supplies. Louis Cazada, who also read the information, also said at this time, then walked into his room. Jittered Maud thought for a while and followed in. Sure enough, the two of them were having an affair. As for Jiang Hai and the others, they also returned to their rooms. After resting in the room, Jiang Hai and the others went to the restaurant for dinner in the evening. When they were in the restaurant, naturally many people paid attention to Jiang Hai and the others, but they were not stupid. Maybe they knew that they couldn't afford to offend these people, and they were all taken, so these people didn't come to trouble Jiang Hai and the others. They just watched from a distance. Of course, the most important reason was that these people had actually just arrived. It was summer now, so naturally they could go back and forth through the supply ship, so they didn't need much now. After dinner, Jiang Hai and the others went back to rest. Early the next morning, Jiang Hai and the others left here. However, before they left, they naturally had to get the supplies. The CIA's work, especially with Jiang Hai's financial support, was very reliable. The scientific research station here had already prepared the things they needed. There were 6 huge snowmobiles, each of which could seat 4 people, but now only 2 people could ride each one because they still had to store supplies and so on. There were also a lot of supplies. There were windproof tents, special pots, alcohol blocks, medical kits, and things similar to heat packs. There were also military shovels, pickaxes, hammers, and so on. There were all kinds of tools, but most of them were food. In Antarctica, there was no shortage of water. The seawater couldn't freeze because only water vapor could freeze and turn into snow. So all the snow and ice in Antarctica was freshwater. This didn't matter. The main thing was food, such as special jerky, chocolate bars, compressed biscuits. Although these things tasted very bad in Antarctica, these were all life-saving things. The last and most important thing was fuel, gasoline. Jiang Hai's snowmobiles were a mixture of gasoline and electricity. There was a solar panel on the snowmobiles. During the day they could use the electricity to run. If there was not enough electricity, or if it was a cloudy day for a long time, or if they had to travel at night, then they could use gasoline. Because gasoline was a mixed liquid, its freezing point, which was the so-called freezing point, was different. Generally speaking, the freezing point of gasoline in China was between -35 to 45 degrees Celsius. In some extremely cold places, it could also reach 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. However, at the Antarctic Scientific Research Station, it was -60 to -70 degrees Celsius all year round, or even colder. Therefore, the freezing point of gasoline here was -80 degrees Celsius, which was also the lowest temperature. -80 degrees Celsius was enough to deal with a lot of situations. Of course, if it reached -80 degrees Celsius or above, then there was no need to go out. Not everyone would seek death at that time. For Jiang Hai, he had spent money anyway, so Jiang Hai and the others didn't stand on ceremony. After packing more than a dozen bags of supplies and more than 20 barrels of gasoline, they left the scientific research station, avoiding the reluctant gazes of these guys. After going outside, Jiang Hai and the others were naturally fully armed. Even Jiang Hai and Xiao Bai were wearing their own custom-made clothes and 2 specially made anti-snow goggles. Sitting behind Jiang Hai's snowmobile, they looked quite impressive. Then Jiang Hai and the others drove the 6 snowmobiles and sped towards the interior of Antarctica. Although Louis Cazada had never been to Antarctica personally, he knew the route and location very well, so he just needed to follow his navigation. Although the snowmobiles couldn't be compared to real motorcycles, they were still very fast here, almost reaching a speed of about 80 kilometers per hour. However, although they weren't slow, the snowmobiles were almost silent because there were snow mountains and glaciers everywhere in Antarctica. If they weren't careful, they could cause an avalanche. Chapter 951. Let's camp here tonight. There's a plane in front of us. It looks like we won't be able to get out today. The strong wind was mixed with snowflakes, constantly blowing on Jiang Hai and the others. Louis Cazada pointed at the electronic map in his hand while speaking to Jiang Hai next to him. Jiang Hai also glanced at the endless plain in the distance and nodded gently. Then the two of them separated and jumped down from the snow slope in front of them. They entered the 2 small camps behind them, one on the left and one on the right. This was where they lived. There were 2 tents on each side, one big and one small. They looked pretty good. It was said that one should not have the intention to harm others, but one must always be vigilant against others. Although they came together, Jiang Hai and Louis Cazada still moved forward in 2 separate groups. They did not mix together. Every day when they set up camp, they would arrange the snowmobiles in 2 rows and place them in the middle as a cordon. Jiang Hai was on the right and Louis Cazada was on the right. Both sides minded their own business and ate their own food. They did not trust each other, but they were together. This journey had been going on for 3 days now. Yes, it had been 3 days since Jiang Hai and the others set off from the scientific research station. During these 3 days, Jiang Hai and the others had been moving towards their goal. Because there was no place to rest, Jiang Hai and the others spent the rest of their time on the snowmobiles, except for when they set up camp. According to the calculation, they ran for 13 hours a day, 80 kilometers an hour. That was more than 1,000 kilometers a day. Of course, they were not walking in a straight line. The road to the South Pole was not completely flat. There were many snow valleys, glaciers and snow mountains. Sometimes Jiang Hai and the others had to jump over them. Sometimes Jiang Hai and the others had to go around them. All of these took time. But even so, 3 days had passed and Jiang Hai and the others had advanced about 4/5 of the way. After jumping over the plain in front of them, they should be near the mountain that was destroyed by the high-altitude landing plan. That was their goal. Walking into the tent, Jiang Hai saw that his people were also busy. Wallace Shelley was fiddling with her electronic equipment. These things were to ensure that Jiang Hai would have the ability to walk out of here if he fell out with Louis Quezada. She had to be careful. Bell Lester was wiping his gun. He had been running for the past few days, but he did not look tired. After all, he used to be from the triangular state. Although he had never been to the South Pole, he must have undergone a lot of training. Knerson Peters was doing push-ups. To him, only by exercising his body could he protect Jiang Hai. Azalina and Galena were in front of a pot, boiling the melted snow inside. Beside them were penguins that were only left with fat and skin. Of course, there were still a lot of feathers on the skin. The feathers on the penguins were indeed feathers, not animal fur. However, these feathers were very small and looked like fine scales. The insulation effect was okay but not very good. The biggest function of the feathers was waterproof and reduce underwater resistance. As Jiang Hai and the others went deeper and deeper into the South Pole, there was no water in the vicinity. There was ice and snow everywhere. Occasionally there would be some water caves and the like. Under such circumstances, most creatures would find it difficult to live here. Therefore, there were many seabirds in the periphery of the South Pole, such as seagulls and other creatures, but they had completely disappeared here. In the past 3 days, Jiang Hai could count the number of seals he saw with his fingers. The only thing that was more abundant was the penguins. Jiang Hai had seen a lot of penguins and he also knew some of the habits of these creatures. To be honest, penguins have a lot of fans both in China and abroad. However, this kind of creature is really a kind of creature. This kind of creature is very sneaky. It often steals things or attacks humans or other creatures. Moreover, although they lived together, their social relationships were very chaotic. The penguins in the South Pole were all lascivious thieves and sluts. Although they were monogamous on the surface, as long as the two were separated, they would do that kind of thing crazily. Even the seals were led astray by the penguins. Originally, the seals caught the penguins to eat, but now the seals sometimes caught the penguins to play. Needless to say, although the penguins were different species, the most important thing was to get into the penguins. Therefore, the parents of penguins took turns to incubate the eggs. When the female incubated the eggs, the male would go out to look for food and then go crazy. Asterisk cough asterisk asterisk cough asterisk. When the male incubated the eggs, the female would go out to look for food and then go crazy. Asterisk cough asterisk asterisk cough asterisk. This was the reality. Most penguins, while raising their own children, would also break other penguins' eggs and bite other penguins' chicks to death. These were all seen by Jiang Hai with his own eyes. Therefore, penguins were really bad creatures. Jiang Hai had also said before that this kind of creature was actually quite bad. However, once, when Jiang Hai and Xiaobai went out to play, they caught a penguin back. Jiang Hai wanted to try it out, so he cooked it and ate it. In the end, he found that if only the lean meat inside was eaten, the taste was actually not bad, but it was a little too fishy. However, this was easy to solve. Jiang Hai brought wine and ginger, which were all things to remove the fishy smell. The penguin meat cooked with these things tasted good, and it had a kind of beef and mutton taste. Of course, there was no way to eat the fat. The skin, claws, and head were all inedible. However, in this kind of weather, being able to eat a bite of fresh meat was also a good enjoyment. Jiang Hai and the others had been eating like this for 2 days. Soon, Azalina and Galena finished cooking the pot of penguin meat. After quietly throwing away the soup, they boiled a new pot of water and threw the penguin meat, dried vegetables, and other things into the pot. As the water in the pot boiled again, the smell of broth filled the tent. Smelling this smell, everyone's eyes also focused on it. As the broth was ready, Azalina also gave everyone a big bowl of broth. Little Huang and Xiaobai also had a bowl each. Then, with the compressed biscuits, Jiang Hai and the others also started eating. They should be arriving soon. Azalina asked Jiang Hai while eating. Well, they should be arriving soon. Abel nodded. According to Louis Cazada, they should be arriving tomorrow. Then we have to be careful. Galina also looked at Azalina and said after hearing what Jiang Hai said. Don't worry, they won't have the guts to touch us before they find out anything. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also smiled and said. He was telling the truth. For a privileged person like him, there was really nothing to be afraid of. There's no harm in being careful, boss. At this time, Bell smiled at the side. He still supported Galina's statement. Well, there's no harm in being careful. Hearing Bell's words, Jiang Hai nodded. There's no harm in being careful. Soon, everyone finished the food in front of them, and then Bell and Knerson Peters returned to their tent. Little Huang and Xiao Bai also ran outside the tent sensibly. They will be on guard nearby and will come back to sleep during the day tomorrow. Compared to being on guard, they are actually more dutiful. Then only Jiang Hai and the other three were left in the tent. Of course, this is the Great South Pole. Jiang Hai is not crazy enough to make children in the tent, but rubbing and hugging are inevitable and they are more used to this. After changing his clothes, Jiang Hai hugged the three girls and fell asleep. The night passed without any words. The next morning, Azalina heated a pot of water again. After everyone washed up, they looked at the direction of the wind. After all, it was summer. Although the wind was about level 7, they could still walk. After putting on their equipment and packing their things, Jiang Hai and the others rode their snowmobiles, jumped over the snowy peak in front of them, and headed towards the plains in front of them. Along the way, everyone's speed was not slow, and they soon rushed to the plains. However, as the old saying goes, looking at a mountain is close enough to kill a horse. Nothing can be done based on the scenery on the plains.